Hi, I'm Chris from Airwindows, and I have something to demonstrate to you today. It's a little thing called ElectroHat. Here, I'll start showing you what it is. You'll know we've got some music going on, but it needs a hi-hat, so here's two. Now, they sound pretty similar, right? They're split left and right. One of these is a 909 sample, and one of them is ElectroHat, and it's being run off of a sound that you can hear here. Now, the real sound that you can hear is I have to bypass it to do that. Now, don't mind that, that's a little bit loud. Now, what am I talking about here? We'll just cut some of this stuff out. Here you've got just the kick and the hats. Now they sound pretty similar, right? But that is the sample. But this is ElectroHat. The idea is it is a sort of new style synthetic instrument. It runs as an audio unit, like an audio unit that you would put on a track. Here's another example. That's ElectroHat set to the same thing, but it's being used on the kick drum. This kick drum is driving that hat. What it's doing is it's going to a bus, you can see it here, and the bus is being given a delay. And you can see the delay here. It's an eighth note delay, not a quarter note. You could change it using different delays. Or do stuff like delay it more, do things like that. Now here's why you'd want to do this. Don't mind me, I'm just going to be adjusting this stuff a little bit. You've got the sample version here. Notice that it's kind of repetitive. It doesn't sound very organic. Whereas ElectroHat has some internal motion to it. It's doing basically the same thing. And you might note that since it seems to come across a little bit differently when you A/B it, I'm going to put it to right and left again to illustrate that it hits pretty much the same. This is not intended to be a sample instrument. This is a different kind of instrument. It is a synthetic hat running off of an audio unit. And it can do some other tricks as well. For instance, this is the 909 preset. With this, these controls don't do anything. But I have other presets. For instance, we can go to 808. Now that's not going to sound exactly like an 808 sample, but it hits in a similar area to what an 808 hat would hit. It is brighter, it's hitting at a more high frequency compared to the 909 there. And then we've got a 606. Just bouncing back to the other setting there. This is based off of 3 different controls that are tunable, and using these you can select these presets, like the 909 or the 808. You can hear that's a little higher, especially if you have good tweeters. Or the 606 is a classic electronic hat That's a very sought after Roland. But you can do some other things as well, such as this is the synthetic setup. It's a custom setting. You can go to the dense hat. The dense hat is going to be a little thicker, or the synthetic hat, which is, well, you'll see. But we'll start with the Electro Hat. The Electro Hat, I wonder if I can pull that down. Let's focus on the hat for the moment. I could also throw in the other hat at the same time, but we'll do just the, actually, let's use this one. You can really hear the differences in this guy. We'll go to the Electro Hat. Now here we're clearly getting an unusual hat. This is one of the trim settings that, and I'll also demonstrate the brightness a little bit here. With no brightness, you're going to get a little more of the mid-range in there. It's useful for some of the sample-based synthetic hats that you might want to simulate. And cranking up the brightness will get you more to an 808 type of sound, as you can hear. But you can also hear that this particular sound is a little weird. It's doing funny things. I'm going to hold down Option and adjust this trim level, and Option is going to let me do very small adjustments to this. Every single one of these setting adjustments is going to have a slightly different sound. It's like an analog electronic hat being synthesized out of the settings. See, it just went over to a somewhat more natural kind of hat there. And then it jumps to something even stranger. Now many of these settings will sound kind of similar, but the overall upshot of it, and just for fun I'm going to bounce back to the other one to sweep through it. We'll put the brightness right up so you can hear all the detail, and I'm going to slide through the settings, exploring them. There, that got a little thicker. You'll hear the frequencies shift as I go. Now that was interesting right there. That could be usable. And then keep going. Something was in there which was interesting. Let's go to the, hold the Option down, sneak back this way. Aha! Here we have a very weird electronic hat. I should be able to go to the other hat and reproduce it by setting, yep, here we got Electro Hat, and it's 0.312. Yep. Doing this kind of stuff, we can dial in really unusual electronic hats. You don't have to be stuck to just your standard 808 or your standard 909 or whatever, even though those are neat settings. And I've tracked down within this enormous range of settings what I thought was closest to those types of sounds, because I consider them to be types of sounds. It's difficult to buy the original vintage units anyhow, so I'm going to explore a little more. Oh, but I'm going to turn on the original one. There we go. That's a fairly dry sort of one. That's an interesting though, and that sounds like some kind of metallic ring or whatever. These noises can be useful in multiple contexts. You could have different things going through and set up different copies of ElectroHat on different channels with different types of high-frequency synthetic effects. I will take a minute to show you that this is a very high-frequency type sound here. All this stuff is sitting over here at the moment. My face is going to be more from the other side. Like this here is, you can see the frequencies being generated by the hat. And you can also see that there's aux2. I can make it hit in lower frequencies, or I can crank it way up to here. But the shape of this high frequency element is like pre-boosted. They're all going to increase up towards the Nyquist frequency. So don't sit these too loud in the mix. Have decent tweeters. You can also do things like, here's one possible technique. I'm going to load up a plugin that I use, Ditherbox. I have freebies for this. You can monitor these hats by going to slew only monitoring. Now that's so loud I'm going to have to turn it down. Sorry about that. But I have a plugin called slew only that can show you what these hats and things sound like. And you can get a sense of how loud they are by going to this type of monitoring. Now I'll take the hat back. We were in the process of monitoring this, and there's another thing I'm going to show you here, which is if I hit bypass, and I have a clipper on the output, it'll be loud though. That's what it's being driven off of. This hat is driven off of analog sound. You could make a digital instrument and operate it off of that, but it can also operate off of pre-recorded analog sound, which is a significant thing. Oh, hang on. Fire that up again. We're going to continue exploring the sounds of this. Here's another interesting one. And this is all the tunable ElectroHat settings. It's a slightly dulled, slightly softened kind of sound, which I've used for I think it was the non-606 versions of the presets, but there are other ones as well. Like here is the dense hat, and you'll notice that if you put it to 0, we immediately get one of those bionic hats. This is doing crazy things to the extreme highs. I'll move it off of there. Actually, what I'll do is lower the brighten just enough to see what that was like. And then let's step off of there. Immediately we're getting to a more normal type of hat. And there are going to be nodes in here where we get more of those bionic sounds. Each one is going to be slightly different. That's a node with the silence. There's nothing in there. And dense hat is going to give you, it's going to sound kind of like the sample-based Roland things, especially if you kill the brightness. This sounds a lot like the 505 or whatever. Not desirable necessarily, but you might have a use for it. And again, it is a synthetic one, so it's going to sound a little different with each hit. It's not going to be exactly the same, like triggering a sample repeatedly. This has got the same rhythmic consistency as firing a sample repeatedly, but it is not doing the same thing as far as giving exactly the same sound. It's like a magnified version of having a hardware unit that's going to be a little bit different each time. I'll keep moving. There's another one of the ray guns. Oh yeah. Total laser ray gun thing. And you can also hear that there's a phaser-like effect to it. It's like spaceship noises. And this is just one of the millions of, well, not millions, but dozens probably, of sounds like this within ElectroHat. You can pick and choose as long as you can find your way to the one that you want. We'll keep sliding that along. And these ones have a pretty fat attack, really. I can lower the brighten and really get a sort of dark, white noisy kind of attack. And this doesn't actually work out like white noise because the way it's being generated is not really what you'd call a good noise algorithm. It's a noise algorithm that has artifacts and overtones in such a way that it's going to resemble some of your synthetic hat. It literally is a synthetic hat, and it's not going to exactly behave like white noise. Like you heard that other stuff's phasing on you. Now we'll go to the syn hat. That's really strange. I wouldn't make an entire hat sound like this. You know, with brightness even more strong. I'll set it at 50% or so that we can hear what all the ranges of it sound like. And the syn hat scrolls like this. You can really hear how it shifts. And it's also hitting a lot of nodes. You can get much more metallic sounding 808 type things out of this. Or you can let me dial this in. That's a strange metallic sound. We'll keep moving because this is very ringy still. This is an obnoxious little ring. That was kind of interesting. Syn hat is all about doing these sounds that don't even make much of an effort at pretending to be white noise. Although they have their points. This one's interesting. Let me try this on the other hat. That was 257. So we'll quickly bounce over to that. There, see, this is syn hat at 0.257, and that's a real interesting sound. It's hi-hat-like. It doesn't sound much like white noise at all, but it's not just the ring that you got from the other one. We'll keep scrolling a little bit. I think I heard an interesting attack in there. I'll keep scrolling quickly down. Hang on, that's interesting. That's a good, very high-pitched hat. You can crank it up with the brighten and make it even more high-pitched. This is the kind of hat that you could use in really modern, like D&B type stuff, where you need to have a digital audio workstation in order to be able to handle the sheer brightness of the high percussion elements. You can sit this in the mix real quietly. And if you compare that with, say, using a 909 hat for the same purpose, you know, that's going to block things a lot more. That's much more of a mid-rangey element. But if you go to the ElectroHat, that sits way up there. That can sit in an entire range right up top. And there we have another really strange synthetic hat. Here's 989. Now we'll use this hat to demonstrate some other things as well. What I'm doing in order to make this have the correct kind of attack is using some freebies from airwindows. You can see them here, and they are digital black and point. Now here's what the hat sounds like on the kick drum all by itself. Now, if this is a interesting kick drum to you, well, it ought to be, because it's one of my upcoming products. It's a thing called Jackhammer, and it's a sample-based thing. But here's what I'm doing, and the reason that I developed this plugin was because I needed to do a synthetic hat, and I don't have one of those pieces of equipment, and I'm running this type of music off of samples. These are literally loops that I'm going to be selling that will show up in the Gear Slots sample and loop ghetto. And they are hardware recordings driven by a Kawai hardware sequencer. My contention is that this is tighter rhythm than triggering stuff through MIDI inside a DAW. It's basically a subsample because it's firing the stuff off of the hardware sequencer and then recording it through my Apogee and stuff. So if the timing is that tight, then what ends up happening is the recording of it can capture whatever the timing is, whether it lines up with samples or MIDI sequencer triggering or not. And as you can see, it sounds kind of like that. We'll pull this back in here again. And you can hear that that's not that tight of an attack. And also that it's hanging on for a while. Like, that's not that impressive of a electronic hat. Certainly not compared to the aggression of that one, where you can really hear the attack. But I can make this into the same thing by turning on the Freebie Digital Black 2 and the Freebie Point. Digital Black 2 is gating the thing. I've got it set up with the on threshold really high, and the off threshold is down here. And I can adjust the gate speed, which is doing a job of showing me how quickly it's turning on and off. For instance, if I go this way, it slows down. And then that speeds up. I'm not sure if I can cut it off that much with this one. With the other one, I can actually cut it off. Actually, so I can cut it off entirely. But that's not a tight attack, that's just a tight decay. It's shutting itself right up. Using point is the Freebie Transient Designer. And that's what I'm using to put an edge on the thing. You can hear it's increasing the amount of attack, and that's point all by itself. Again, these are free. And then if I put the noise gate on as well, it's going to tighten up the attack a little bit, because that's exaggerating what the Transient Designer does, making the transition from silence rather than making the transition be a little slower than that. And we can adjust the reaction speed on point, which is a very striking result, and that will change the attack that we get. You'll hear that now. It's boosting it to some extent. That's giving us a slightly fatter attack tick, and then goes this direction. And it becomes too fine of an attack tick to really do very much. Although if we tighten up the gate, we start to get more action out of that more high frequency tick. And what I'll do just for a moment there is, moving these guys out of the way for a second, we're going to pull this right down, like right down, shut off ElectroHat, and you're going to hear what point and digital black are doing to this kick drum that's triggering ElectroHat. Now with point off, there's digital black. Digital black's gate speed is so fast that it's starting to cut on and off with the actual kick drum's release time. Like you can hear it kind of flicking on and off with the actual waveform itself because it's a low enough frequency that it can do that. I'll speed it up until it's giving us a nice crisp on and off. Again, that's coming from this. You can hear how the attack tick is a little sharper that way. And now we turn on point. And this has boosted the point up. If we take the point back, again, this is the Freebie point. We're softening the attack, but what we want to do is boost the attack. And the reaction speed is going to give us the flavor of the kind of attack we're adding. This is how you can take a sound and build a hi-hat out of it using ElectroHat. Hear how it's attacking differently? Then we change the voicing. And up here we're not getting that much of an attack anymore. Now, it might seem fairly obvious that you can get a hat out of something like this because, after all, it is a kick drum. It's got an attack already. But what if you don't have an attack? Such as this guy. This hat is being driven off of this sample, which is one of my samples for the Jackhammer looping set. It only comes in this pitch, but that's because you can use it to gate things and stuff. It's basically side trance bass. And this is all it is. This is what you get. Now, since this is a bass, it doesn't necessarily have the kind of attack that you need for a hat. So what you get is this. This is not necessarily what you'd want for a hat. It's soft. I mean, maybe you do, but it's certainly not doing a very good 909 imitation because it is just too soft. So you can turn on the gate. And the gate's going to get you part of the way there. And you can do stuff with like the gate speed, for instance, shortening the gate speed on this setup. Will really get you a sharp little sound there. But where it really sort of lights up is when you engage point and start to crank up the transients. Now that's arguably too much edge, but it's being generated out of a really soft synthetic bass sound. Not even a percussion sound, this is a bass sound. That's what ElectroHat is for. It's for using simple tools and existing recordings and existing tracks and overlaying the high frequency element, the high percussion that you need for modern electronic music. And it's supposed to sound electronic, but it's going to sit properly in a mix as long as you're careful with the loudness of it. Don't make it turn up too loud because it eats up a lot of space in the very extreme highs. You probably will want to have, for something like a backbeat, you're probably going to want to do something, for instance, like, let's close this for a second. We'll throw on the 909 preset, for instance. Or heck, let's go all the way. We'll go to a dense hat and take the brighten all the way down. Now using this, no, I still like it with the point, but we can take off digital black maybe. Using this, we can have multiple levels of electronic hat. We can have a high frequency hat and a mid-high frequency hat, which is the backbeat. And that can supply your, basically your backbeat. And we can even throw in things like drum kits and stuff to sit with it. You know, and a whole bunch of variety of things like trancy type effects, even real instruments, some little background effects and stuff. Things like that. And you can get a very decent little electronic thing. But what we've got here is 3 different kinds of hi-hats sitting in this mix. We can even pan this one because, as you can hear, we've got a real live acoustic kit with the hat on the side, so we can make the other hat be on the other side. Or, even better, we can have the backbeat be over here. And doing this kind of thing, you can have a lot of interesting stuff going on in the extreme highs of your mix. And most of that is being done with ElectroHat. There is the acoustic hat in here. And taking it out, we just have the electronic ones. But if we didn't have those, we might be sitting with just a sample hat. Now that's a lot more static. That's just a lot more static than the things you can do with ElectroHat. I've got ElectroHat doing 2 very different sounds at 2 very different rates. And that's not even considering the stuff that I can do with the echoes. Why would you want to have a sample hat? Why would you want to have something that just sits there like this, when you can go to multiple electronic hats that are still being triggered by purely synthetic, computer-controlled elements, but they don't just sit there. ElectroHat. Now I'll be getting out this sample thing with which you can do these things, but bear in mind that even if you don't have the samples to drive it with, you can always just take something like Here we are. Sample 909. Electro Hat 909. It's as easy as that. The sample 909 is actually a little bit louder, so that's not really a good example, but sample 909. And the Electro Hat. I think this is a good one. I hope people buy it. And it was a lot of fun creating it, because I got to listen to lots of recordings of classic electronic hats and explore things like, for instance, the 606, which is probably my favorite of the electronic hats. I mean, people know 808s and 909s and stuff, but I just love the particular attack of the 606, and I did my closest approximation of it. Hope you like it.